In the shadows of history, where official records end and silence begins, lie fragments of a war never truly finished. Buried files, erased names, and weapons that should not have existed whisper from forgotten vaults. These are not the victories, remembered in textbooks, but the secrets that poisoned the peace. What was hidden was not destroyed, it was only transferred, waiting to be uncovered by those willing to stare into the archives no one was meant to open. The first official mention of Projekt Seeschlange appears in a partially declassified British Naval Intelligence Memorandum dated 17th of June 1945, catalogued under ADM 223-441. The document is sparse, redacted in wide black strokes, but it references a German experimental platform, maritime in character, not conforming to known Kriegsmarine designs, with potential strategic transatlantic capability. To understand why this vague sentence carried such weight, one must step back to the final chaotic months of the war in Northern Europe. In April 1945, as the Wehrmacht collapsed, Allied forces swept through Norway to disarm German garrisons still, holding ports along the Atlantic coast. Norway had been a linchpin of Hitler's naval strategy, providing deep fjords from Narvik to Trondheim, where U-boats could hide beneath towering cliffs. Many Kriegsmarine installations were intact when seized, but in certain sectors, notably in the Trøndelag region, Allied reports described not abandoned bases, but entire communities stripped bare, villages with no residents, records removed from municipal archives, and even church baptism registries torn apart. One such location was the fishing village of Agdenes, overlooking the approaches to the Trondheim Fjord. A British commando detachment from 30 Assault Unit, an intelligence-gathering formation under Commander Ian Fleming, landed there on 3 May 1945. They expected resistance. Instead, they found shuttered homes, livestock wandering unattended, and evidence of hurried evacuation. In the harbour, crude scaffolding and rails descended into the water as if used to launch or recover vessels. Naval engineers noted that the dimensions did not match U-boat pens. They appeared designed for something longer, thinner, and less bulky than the standard Type 7 submarine. Within 2 weeks, British teams recovered fragments of technical drawings from a requisitioned warehouse in Trondheim, each marked with the codename Seeschlange, Sea Serpent. The sketches suggested a vessel built with modular sections, capable of being lengthened or shortened for specific missions. Its hull lines were radically different from conventional submarines, more in line with experimental undersea gliders than warships. A handwritten note, translated from German, read, "Atlantic crossing without refueling, submerged duration 28 days. At the time, the best U-boats could remain submerged for only 3 days before running batteries dry. The implication was staggering. The Admiralty moved quickly to secure all evidence. On 22 May 1945, a classified directive ordered Royal Navy engineers to comb the fjords with sonar. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. At least 2 wrecks were located on the seabed west of Kristiansund, scuttled in deep water. Divers reported twisted hulls unlike any known class of submarine. When photographic plates were sent to London, they were filed under non-standard prototypes, then locked away. None were ever publicly released. Survivor testimony added another layer of uncertainty. In the summer of 1946, Norwegian fishermen recounted sightings of long black shadows beneath the water near Lofoten. A German prisoner, Oberleutnant zur See Hans Reichel, interrogated at Camp 186 in England, claimed he had overseen supply operations for Projekt Seeschlange. He described docking bays carved directly into cliffsides, sealed by camouflaged rock, doors, where the vessels were resupplied with compressed oxygen and experimental fuel cells. When pressed for more detail, Reichel refused to elaborate, stating only, "You will never find them. They are already elsewhere." His interrogation transcript ends abruptly with the notation, "Subject transferred," but no record of his subsequent location exists. By 1947, Seeschlange disappears from official correspondence. A few entries in the minutes of the Joint Intelligence Committee hint at technology under evaluation in the United States. suggesting that fragments, or possibly entire vessels, had been shipped across the Atlantic under Operation Lusty, the program responsible for acquiring advanced German technology. However, no surviving American files reference Seeschlange directly. The only potential clue lies in a US Navy Bureau of Ships memorandum from March 1948, describing new forms of underwater propulsion research derived from foreign materials, which remained highly classified until the mid-1970s. By then, the connection to wartime Norway had faded. The absence of documentation might have ended the matter, except for one curious rediscovery in 1961. During NATO exercises near Bergen, sonar operators detected an anomalous contact moving silently, at depths then thought unattainable. Classified as fast deep object, the track was logged but never publicly explained. Decades later, retired Norwegian officers admitted privately that the incident was reopened when parallels were drawn to wartime Seeschlange files. Had one of the missing prototypes survived, operating autonomously long after its creators were gone, or had the Soviets, through post-war capture, replicated the technology? Today, the surviving Seeschlange documents remain fragmented. The National Archives in Kew contain 2 heavily redacted pages, the rest withheld on grounds of national security. Norwegian municipal records for Agdens and other villages remain curiously incomplete, with entire census rolls missing from 1940 to 1945. And in Trondheim's harbour, old fishermen still point to rusting rails that once ran down into the fjord, insisting they were built not for submarines, but for the serpents. The truth behind Projekt Seeschlange is unlikely to surface in full. What little survives in classified archives hints at an engineering leap that, if fully realized, would have rewritten the strategic balance of the Atlantic. Whether the technology was destroyed, smuggled into another power's arsenal, or still lies rusting in forgotten fjords remains a question history refuses to answer. The files that remain on Operation Edelweiss are scattered fragments that should not exist at all. The first surfaced in Warsaw in January 1945, as the Red Army stormed into the city's ruins. Soviet officers of Smersh Unit 47, combing through basements and collapsed tenements, uncovered metal crates hidden beneath a collapsed railway office near Aleje Jerozolimsky. Inside, under layers of oiled cloth, were reels of microfilm bearing the Abwehr Eagle insignia. Each was labelled Edelweiss, followed by code numbers and geographical references not to Poland, but to Allied convoy routes through North Africa and the Middle East. The discovery baffled Soviet intelligence. The microfilm contained precise data on British supply depots in Alexandria, tanker schedules through the Suez Canal, even coded communications from the Cairo headquarters of Middle East Command. The most damning reel was marked Harrier. Its contents, later described in a secret GRU report, suggested the Abwehr had access to high-level British operational planning between 1941 and 1942. The detail was so exact: shipment tonnage, convoy code words, the rotation of Commonwealth divisions, that it implied not simple interception, but penetration. On 12th of February 1945, Colonel Viktor Makarov of the NKVD filed a restricted memorandum titled Abwehr Penetration of British Command Structures, Possible High-Level Defection. The name Harrier was underlined in red, yet within weeks the reels were moved to Moscow, logged under archival reference SM-20391 and sealed. By late 1947, all references to Edelweiss vanished from Soviet records. Researchers piecing together the case decades later find only blank entries where documents once existed. What made Moscow silence its own discovery? Testimony from defectors hints at uncomfortable truths. In 1963, a former Polish intelligence officer, Jerzy K., who fled to the West, claimed he saw the Edelweiss microfilm during his service as a translator in Warsaw. He described one reel showing intercepted correspondence between General Claude Auchinleck, then Commander-in-Chief Middle East, and London. If genuine, it would mean the Abwehr had compromised British cipher traffic or recruited someone inside Allied headquarters. Jerzy swore that Soviet handlers panicked at the implications. If Britain's codes had been broken, the Soviet Union's own wartime correspondence, often routed through the same channels, might also have been exposed. Better, perhaps, to bury the evidence than admit vulnerability. British archives add another layer of intrigue. A post-war MI5 registry file, KV-6144, references unsubstantiated Soviet claims of a British defector, codenamed Harrier, circa 1942. The entry concludes, no corroboration, likely disinformation. Yet the file also notes that several officers in Cairo during that period were quietly investigated after the war. 1. A signals officer named Major Peter L. was abruptly reassigned in 1946 and vanished from Army records. His personnel file, unusually, is sealed until 2050. No explanation is offered. Meanwhile, in Moscow, officers who handled the Edelweiss crates seem to suffer a peculiar fate. Colonel Makarov, who authored the original report, was reassigned to Vladivostok and disappeared in 1948 during an internal purge. His adjutant was executed on corruption charges. Even the translator, who first catalogued the reels, reportedly died in a suspicious car crash in 1950. None lived to see the post-Stalin thaw. The Edelweiss discovery had become a ghost, swallowing those who touched it. One piece of the puzzle resurfaced in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed and private researchers gained brief access to state archives. Among the files hastily copied was a single index card referencing film reel Edelweiss Harrier, deposited Lubyanka Vault 1945, removed 1947. The card bore a faint annotation in blue pencil, for committee use only. What committee is unclear. The reels themselves have never been found, theories abound. Some historians argue Edelweiss was merely a deception, planted by retreating German forces to sow distrust between allies. Yet the level of detail recorded, down to the number of RAF sorties from Malta on specific days, argues against fabrication. Others suggest the Abwehr's Harrier was not a single agent, but a composite of multiple leaks, collated under one codename. If so, the penetration was even deeper, extending across multiple Allied theaters. There are darker possibilities. Declassified CIA cables from 1956 reveal that American counterintelligence privately feared the Soviets had exploited Edelweiss data to recruit or blackmail British officers in the early Cold War. If Moscow did possess reels proving British compromise, they would have been invaluable leverage. Why then does no trace remain? Perhaps the Soviets destroyed the evidence to prevent its exposure, or perhaps it was transferred into another archive, one that remains sealed. The Edelweiss mystery leaves uncomfortable questions. How did the Abwehr obtain such precise Allied intelligence? Did a British officer betray his command under the codename Harrier, his identity erased by silent agreement between Moscow and London? Or was the entire operation a phantom, its only purpose to destabilize trust among allies in the fragile final months of war? What is known is this: crates existed, reels were catalogued, names were written down. Then, in the years following victory, every reference was methodically excised. The last surviving record is the silence itself, an absence more eloquent than any testimony. And somewhere, perhaps still in a locked vault in Moscow or buried in the sealed files of Whitehall, lies the microfilm of Edelweiss, evidence of a betrayal too dangerous for history to remember. In the spring of 1945, as US forces swept into southern Germany, a small detachment of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, stumbled upon a facility that official maps described as an ordinary industrial steelworks, located outside the Bavarian town of Kaufbeuren. It was known locally as Stahlwerk 5. To Allied eyes, it appeared unremarkable: rusting cranes, idle furnaces, and a workforce of displaced laborers awaiting liberation. Yet when OSS technical officers forced entry into the sub-levels beneath the main foundry floor, they uncovered a cache of documents and machinery that would soon vanish into classified obscurity. The first report, filed by OSS officer Captain Harold B. Kirk on 2 May 1945, describes a research installation camouflaged as an industrial plant, containing evidence of advanced aviation projects beyond current Allied development. Kirk's notes reference vertical launch platforms resembling crude rocket silos, test rigs for liquid fuel propulsion, and fuselage frames unlike any known Luftwaffe aircraft. One design, sketched hastily into his field notebook, depicted a swept-wing interceptor with no propeller mountings and an underslung rocket motor. The designation written on several blueprints was Flugkörper 13. Alongside it appeared a second term, Projekt Falke. Interrogations of surviving technicians revealed chilling fragments. A captured engineer, Dr. Werner Lenz, admitted that the plant was not producing steel at all, but fabricating high-temperature alloys for experimental jet and rocket airframes. He claimed the designs had originated in a secret Luftwaffe bureau under General Feldmarschall Erhard Milch, funneled through SS research departments. According to Lenz, the prototypes were capable of vertical takeoff and near supersonic speeds, using guidance systems half radio, half mechanical. He insisted that days before American troops arrived, SS guards oversaw the removal of completed components, loaded onto convoys bound for northern Italy. OSS records confirmed that between 24 and 28 April 1945, convoys of trucks escorted by Waffen-SS units were sighted near Innsbruck, heading toward the Brenner Pass. Allied air reconnaissance noted unusual loads, elongated crates nearly 20 meters in length. Yet the chaos of Germany's collapse meant the shipments were never intercepted. By the time Allied forces secured the Alpine routes, nothing remained. The missing cargo was never officially traced. What happened next is even murkier. The documents, seized at Kaufbeuren, some 14 crates of blueprints, logbooks and parts, were transferred under Operation Lusty, the US program to acquire advanced German aviation technology. A surviving receipt from 12th of May 1945 confirms their arrival at Wright Field in Ohio. But within a year, all references to Stahlwerk 5 vanish from American inventories. When post-war congressional investigators requested records in 1947, the Air Technical Intelligence Division reported that no material under that designation can be located. Researchers later discovered that the crates had been reclassified under an entirely different project name, now believed lost in the labyrinth of early Cold War black programs. Rumors persist that fragments of Stahlwerk 5's work reappeared elsewhere. In 1947, US Army intelligence in Argentina reported sightings of German émigré engineers assembling advanced flying craft on remote ranches in Patagonia. Witnesses described test flights of vehicles shaped like arrows without wings, echoing the Flugkörper drawings seized in Bavaria. Although dismissed at the time as exaggeration, the reports are consistent with Argentine efforts to recruit German scientists under President Perón's regime. No physical evidence survived. Another thread emerges from Soviet sources. In a 1953 KGB technical memorandum, declassified after the fall of the USSR, analysts noted that American prototypes for long-range rocket interceptors bear significant resemblance to captured German materials not made available to the Soviet Union. The implication was clear. Some of the technology seized from Stahlwerk 5 had been withheld from the Allies' agreed-upon sharing of captured research, diverted into unilateral development. Yet not all traces of Stahlwerk 5 disappeared into American hands. In 1968, construction workers clearing an old bomb shelter near Kaufbeuren unearthed charred binders containing half-burned diagrams. Local police records, filed under case number 68447, describe sketches of aircraft fuselages without cockpit windows, as if intended for unmanned operation. Though dismissed as remnants of destroyed war debris, the documents suggest the facility may have been exploring guided or remotely piloted weapons decades before the concept became mainstream. The human cost of this research was hidden as carefully as the technology. Surviving testimonies from forced laborers indicate that dozens, perhaps hundreds, of prisoners were worked to death in the underground assembly halls of Stahlwerk 5. One survivor, a Czech mechanic named Josef Marek, gave a deposition in 1946 describing tunnels filled with the noise of turbines, where prisoners assembled frames under SS guards. Marek insisted that 2 completed aircraft were removed in April, guarded by officers wearing SS runes rather than Luftwaffe insignia. His statement was filed, then buried in Allied war crimes archives without further pursuit. Today, the ruins of Stahlwerk 5s are gone. The site was bulldozed in the 1950s, replaced by warehouses. No plaques mark the location. No official record acknowledges the plant's true purpose. The only surviving trace lies in the memories of those who glimpsed its blueprints or saw its convoys vanish into the Alps. The unanswered questions remain. Did prototypes of supersonic interceptors or guided weapons escape the fall of the Reich? Were they quietly absorbed into American or Soviet arsenals, reshaped under new designations? Or did they lie dormant in hidden bunkers, abandoned to rot beneath the mountains? The Stahlwerk 5 case embodies the uneasy silence that followed the war. In the scramble for German technology, records were erased, evidence reclassified, witnesses disappeared. Officially, nothing remained. Yet the faint outlines of swept wings, rocket fuselages, and erased convoy manifests still echo through the fragmented archives, hinting at machines that should never have existed, and a legacy of vanished prototypes whose shadow may stretch further than we dare admit. The official narrative is simple. Sondergruppe Nachtigall, a German-Ukrainian formation raised under the Abwehr in 1941, was dissolved in late 1943 after its bloody record in Eastern Europe became an embarrassment. Its officers were dispersed into other units, its files scattered, its memory absorbed into the blur of retreat and reorganization. Yet in 1952, an incident in the Free Territory of Trieste opened a sealed door into a different story, one in which Nachtigall did not vanish, but instead lingered in the shadows long after the Reich's collapse. The discovery began with a warehouse inventory. US Army G2 officers in Trieste, tasked with cataloguing abandoned Wehrmacht supplies, unearthed crates marked Waffen SS, personal Akten. Inside were not random service records, but an intact archive of Nachtigall personnel files, names, assignments, operational orders, even disciplinary notes. The surprise was not their existence, it was the dates. Several files bore directives issued in December 1945 and April 1946, years after the unit's supposed dissolution. The orders referenced assassination campaigns in Vienna, sabotage missions in Hungary, and liaison contacts with unnamed Western intelligence partners. The most damning file was that of SS Obersturmführer Karl-Heinz Brenner, recorded as executed for war crimes in Soviet reports of 1944. Yet the Trieste archive contained orders signed in his name 2 years later, directing Nachtigall detachments to establish networks across the Danube basin. If genuine, it meant that officers officially listed as dead were still in the field, operating under a structure erased from the record. The Army's immediate reaction was silence. The crates were sealed, relabeled under innocuous designations, and transferred to a secure depot in Verona. Internal memoranda between US counterintelligence corps officers debate whether the files should be shared with British or French counterparts. The final notation, dated 7 July 1952, reads only, "Retain custody, not for dissemination." Survivor testimony provides eerie corroboration. In 1947, Austrian police investigated a string of political assassinations in Vienna, murders of former communist partisans, all carried out with the same 9mm parabellum round. A captured suspect confessed he had once served in Nachtigall and claimed his orders came from the same men as before, only under different uniforms. The case was abruptly closed after American officers intervened. Police files were sealed. The murders remain unsolved. Meanwhile, Soviet archives contain their own shadows. A 1948 NKVD bulletin lists Nachtigall cells as active threats in Czechoslovakia, reporting cross-border raids and the disappearance of party officials. The bulletin concludes, evidence of Western collusion is probable. Whether this was Cold War paranoia or grounded intelligence is impossible to say. What is notable is that after 1949, Nachtigall ceases to appear in Soviet reporting, It is as if the unit was swallowed whole, erased as part of a larger bargain. The most unsettling fragments come from declassified CIA records. A redacted cable from 1951 describes use of former Nachtigall elements in anti-communist operations, specifically sabotage along the Hungarian-Yugoslav border. The same cable notes concerns that files recently surfaced in Trieste threaten to compromise ongoing arrangements. No names are given. The cable ends. Recommend secure and neutralize. Within months, the Trieste archive was gone. Its removal was never officially recorded, and no trace of the crates has surfaced since. The individuals tied to Nachtigall fared no better. Those named in the files were either reported killed in accidents, emigrated under false identities, or vanished without record. One, identified as Oberfeldwebel Josef H., appeared briefly in Munich in 1954, where he allegedly offered information to a journalist about operations after surrender. 2 weeks later, his body was found in the Isar River. Police ruled it drowning. His widow insisted he was murdered. Even memory itself was attacked. In the years following the war, public discourse painted Nachtigall as a short-lived unit, dissolved amid the Eastern Front chaos. The possibility that it continued, operating as a deniable, disposable tool in the grey zones of early Cold War intelligence, was never entertained. To acknowledge such a possibility would have meant admitting that Allied and Soviet powers alike had absorbed fragments of SS formations into their clandestine wars, blurring the line between victor and vanquished. By the 1970s, all surviving traces of Nachtigall beyond 1943 had been buried. Only scattered testimonies, half-burned police files, and the vanished Trieste crates suggested otherwise. Researchers who probed too deeply often found themselves stonewalled by sealed records, particularly in British and American archives. One historian, Dr. Ernst Weibel, who attempted to publish on the Trieste discovery in 1978, reported receiving anonymous warnings. His manuscript was never released. He later claimed the files had been reclassified not as history, but as operations. Today, Nachtigall exists as both fact and ghost. Officially, it ended in 1943. Unofficially, its officers reappear in contradictory places: Vienna alleyways, Hungarian forests, Yugoslav border skirmishes, CIA cables. Its archives surfaced, then disappeared. Its members were declared dead, then signed orders years later. Whether Nachtigall survived as an independent remnant or was absorbed into larger intelligence structures is a question the surviving record cannot answer. What is clear is that the story was deliberately buried, not to hide Nazi crimes, but to conceal what came after, when the victors themselves found use for a unit that should have remained in history's grave. In February 1945, as Allied bombers reduced Dresden to ash, one of the city's lesser-known institutions, the Technische Hochschule, a technical university with close ties to the Luftwaffe, was obliterated. Among its wreckage, Soviet recovery units in May discovered a sealed sub-basement that had survived the inferno. Inside lay rows of steel cabinets, charred around the edges but intact, bearing the insignia of the Reich's armaments ministry. When forced open, the drawers revealed engineering blueprints, metallurgical reports, and research correspondence filed under a codename never before seen: Projekt Morgenstern. The Soviet records, declassified only in fragments after 1991, describe the contents in vague but unsettling terms. The blueprints detailed high-yield, compact fission devices intended for tactical deployment. Language chillingly similar to modern nuclear artillery shells. One drawing, dated October 1944, depicted a warhead scarcely larger than a torpedo, its casing annotated with references to enriched uranium and beryllium initiators. A cover sheet bore the name of Professor Kurt Diebner, the physicist already known to have directed aspects of Germany's nuclear research. Yet these designs were unlike anything catalogued in post-war interrogations of Diebner's staff. They implied a level of progress far exceeding the scattered, often contradictory state of the Reich's known atomic program. What happened to these documents remains the subject of bitter dispute. According to a classified Soviet report dated 4th of June, 1945, the cache was loaded onto transport convoys bound for Moscow. Yet a US aerial reconnaissance photograph taken the same week shows Allied personnel near the ruins of the Hochschule, combing through rubble in the very building where the archive was found. Did American forces manage to secure part of the Morgenstern papers before the Soviets removed the rest? Neither side has ever admitted possession. Both, however, advanced their nuclear programs with a speed that suggests outside stimulus. Western intelligence circles first became aware of Morgenstern in 1957, when a defector from East Germany, engineer Rudolf Krantz, claimed he had once translated fragments of the blueprints for Soviet scientists. He described diagrams of spherical implosion lenses, their dimensions matching those of weapons tested years later. Krantz insisted the Soviets had relied heavily on Morgenstern as a conceptual framework. Within months of his testimony, Krantz was found dead in West Berlin, an apparent suicide, though his colleagues reported he had shown no signs of despair. Parallel whispers emerged from the American side. In 1962, Senator Estes Kefauver's staff uncovered an Air Force memorandum, heavily redacted, referencing foreign-derived fission device research materials, Dresden origin, 1945. The document was buried back into classified files before further inquiry. Only a single marginal note survived in photocopy: Morgenstern papers, critical but unacknowledgeable. If genuine, it implied US custody of at least part of the archive. The absence of open acknowledgement may be deliberate. Acknowledging Morgenstern would raise unanswerable questions. How close had Nazi Germany come to producing nuclear weapons? And why were post-war interrogations so careful to paint the program as disorganized, primitive, and years behind schedule? Perhaps the truth was more inconvenient, that both superpowers had quietly fed their own programs with captured fragments, masking the origin under layers of secrecy. What little evidence survives outside official archives comes from scattered testimonies. In 1946, Soviet engineers reportedly tested unusual compact device casings at a secure site near Arzamas, structures unlike the bulky prototypes otherwise in development. In the late 1940s, American researchers at Los Alamos were recorded debating German-style initiator patterns, a phrase that appears nowhere else in declassified literature. Even within intelligence services, knowledge of Morgenstern seems to have been compartmentalized, restricted to a handful of officers. Those who knew often vanished into bureaucratic silence. There is also the matter of the missing convoy. Archival fragments in Russian repositories mention a Dresden to Moscow transport in June 1945 carrying special materials of atomic character. The train never officially arrived. Later references describe the shipment as lost during transfer. Whether it was ambushed, diverted, or quietly absorbed into another inventory has never been explained. No Soviet official ever publicly acknowledged its existence. American analysts speculated that portions of the Morgenstern archive may have disappeared into the black markets of post-war Europe, perhaps explaining why fragments surface intermittently in unlikely places. By the 1970s, Morgenstern had become a phantom in Cold War scholarship, a name whispered in intelligence circles but absent from history books. Some dismissed it as Soviet disinformation, others as a misinterpretation of scattered German research. Yet, the fragments remain: drawings of miniature warheads too advanced for 1944, reports of a missing convoy, unexplained acceleration in both US and Soviet nuclear research. The convergence of these threads suggests not a fantasy, but a suppressed history. The ruins of Dresden tell no stories now. The Hochschule's basements were sealed and later demolished during reconstruction. No trace of the archive survives at the site. Yet a few surviving Soviet photographs, grainy and indistinct, show officers standing over drafting tables covered with diagrams. Diagrams that, when enhanced, show concentric lens arrangements unmistakably reminiscent of implosion designs. Officially, such technology was beyond German reach in 1945. Unofficially, the photographs exist, quietly circulating among researchers who know what they imply. Project Morgenstern remains one of the most troubling shadows of the war's aftermath. Was it a desperate bluff? An illusion crafted by Nazi scientists to bargain for survival? Or was it a real breakthrough, buried by victors unwilling to admit how close the Reich came to rewriting the balance of power? Whatever the answer, the archive's disappearance ensured that no definitive proof remains. All that survives are whispers, half-burned papers, and the silence of two superpowers who built their Cold War arsenals on foundations that may have included the ashes of Dresden's most dangerous secret. The ruins are gone, the witnesses silenced, but the traces remain, in redacted files, erased rosters, and whispers carried through decades of denial. History insists on closure, yet closure was never given. What lies buried beneath official silence is not the past, but the present's unspoken inheritance. These shadows, once born in war, did not die with it. They remain, waiting, concealed in the dark corners of power, where truth is still considered too dangerous to reveal.